The way those two goals for Bournemouth went in to go 2-0 up, I mean, they were just ridiculous things that shouldn't have happened.
Slot wants a small squad. He said that repeatedly, and wanting a small squad has led Liverpool to where they are now. And I think that actually Saturday summed up probably more than any game this season just how lacking in numbers Liverpool are.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm Matt Addison. Michael Plant is with me to discuss Liverpool's 3-2 defeat on the South Coast against Bournemouth. But before we get stuck into that, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. That link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Unfortunately, we are going to have to get stuck straight into it, Michael. The 3-2 defeat, the 5th time Liverpool have conceded in stoppage time, and it's cost them points this season. If they hadn't have done any of those times, they would have had 7 more points than what they have now. And it's been the story of the season, really. It felt a little bit deja vu. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the Champions League and the Premier League games, as we have done a few times over the last few months, a little bit later on. But just purely in terms of a one-off game for Liverpool, it started badly, it got a little bit better, and then it finished in absolutely classic fashion.
Before I answer that, I am a big fan of starting a podcast with, unfortunately, we have to get into this, which probably sums up Liverpool really at the moment. Well, I was going to say at the moment, and it's amazing how quickly the narrative has changed from a 13-game unbeaten run. I mean, Antonio Iraola said before the game that he thinks this is the best version of Liverpool, and then suddenly post-match it seems like we've gone back to crisis mode again. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between on both of those, but I thought it was such an abject performance from Liverpool, so lacking in so many areas, and I think as you rightly said, it just sums up the season in so many ways. Late goal, defensive issues, no goal from open play during the match, an inability to break teams down, and just all the problem, and several big players underwhelming again. What was Virgil van Dijk doing for that first goal? I thought Mohamed Salah had very little to almost no impact on the game, really. Florian Wirtz, lots of nice touches, no end product. Ultimately had to rely on Dominic Szoboszlai for a bit of magic, but ultimately then came up short. And I just think it was just such a terrible, really, really poor performance throughout the 90 minutes. And it showed actually the lack of confidence levels at the moment that are running through this Liverpool team. And they're just, it is, I don't want to go too dramatic because as I said at the start, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but it is a performance that underlines, I think, still how many issues there are for Arne Slot to deal with and to resolve in the long term, I think.
Yeah, the way those 2 goals for Bournemouth went in to go 2-0 up, I mean, they were just ridiculous things that shouldn't have happened. You mentioned Van Dijk there. I think it was Arne Slot that sort of mentioned how difficult the wind was, but I mean, the wind is there for both teams, not for one. It was just too kind of lax and lacking concentration, seemed a little bit too casual really at the back from him. And then, I mean, the second goal just sort of summed up the entire afternoon, really. The fact that, things happen in that way, it just doesn't make any sense to me that you don't just put the ball out. On a Slot and his coaching team on the sideline screaming at Alisson to put the ball out. They don't do it. Liverpool play with 10 men. Almost a little bit of arrogance, I think, in thinking that, we'll be all right for a few minutes with 10 men. And of course, the way things are going for Liverpool at the moment defensively, but just generally, it's not obviously been the case. It just felt so avoidable and so weird as well in the context when you think of Liverpool have been on this 13-game unbeaten run, built on defensive stability, but not necessarily being the most exciting. Suddenly, all of that seemed to go out the window again.
And it feels to me, it's been this way for a while, that when they get one element right, like they get the defense right, the attack doesn't look sharp. And then once they get they manage to score 2 goals, you manage to score 2 goals from set pieces, which has been an issue. Then you've got problems at the other end. It just feels that as they find an answer for one problem, another rears its head a little bit. And that has been the case for a while. And I just think that there were so many different elements you could break down after the game and point to as a problem. And Slot, I wasn't massively impressed with his post-match comments. I didn't think that the Van Dijk assessment, like if you're Virgil van Dijk, you've got to appreciate the wind's been there for, I can't remember when the goal went in, around half an hour in maybe, but you've played with that wind for half an hour. You've got to judge that actually it could hold up in the wind, or it might go a little bit farther, and react to that. And you've got to appreciate the danger. I don't think he did that enough in that moment. And then to basically turn around and say, well, we're really tired, is in some ways a fair excuse, but also just such a weak excuse to say, well, we're really tired, and point to that as the reason. And ultimately as well, if Liverpool are tired, it comes back to the decisions that have been made this month. In, for instance, not going for Mark Gahey, which I think we all thought was a mistake. And then the squad that was assembled in the summer, that I still believe that it wasn't a bad transfer window, but I do think that ultimately they've left themselves light in massive areas. And I think one of the big problems is Arne Slot is so reluctant to turn to certain players, which actually means the squad is lacking in so many areas. So yeah, it was just such a disappointing afternoon for Liverpool. And suddenly as well, now that they've dropped to 6th, I think, in the table, and United and Chelsea have gone above them, and you look and just think that actually this is going to be a difficult second half. Well, last 15 games now of the season.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the tiredness thing, I think it is in some ways probably true. They did look a little bit tired, and yes, they've had a lot of games. I think it's maybe 9 games across the course of January that they've got to fit in, but that isn't a surprise. That is something that they knew was going to happen, and they have, I think, left themselves light. It's obvious that they're light at centre-back. I think they're probably a midfielder light, and they're definitely a winger light as well in terms of just injecting a little bit of pace and quality. They were missing 5 players, 3 obviously long-term. Federico Chiesa is sort of a minor injury that we don't expect to be out for long, but I mean, can you count Chiesa anyway as somebody who's going to play that much? At best, he's going to get 10 or 15 minutes off the bench. He certainly wouldn't have started in that game. And obviously, Ibrahima Konate is out for compassionate leave, and that's obviously a separate case. But to have 5 players missing, and then to suddenly be in a complete crisis and not be able to have enough options, not really to have anything off the bench. Curtis Jones obviously comes off the bench, but Liverpool didn't really look like they had any options to change that game. And five injuries is, I would argue, if not average for any given point in the season, not that far away from a normal level of injuries that if you go across the course of the Premier League, okay, one or two teams won't have that many, but 3 or 4 players being out is not unusual. I would argue that 5 isn't either, and suddenly Liverpool couldn't cope with it. So, I mean, that's a worry, isn't it? That's something that you've got to sort of solve and get a bit more quality into the squad. But I don't know about you, but that's basically where my sympathy with Arne Slot comes. Yes, he should get more out of the players that he's got, but I just think fundamentally he doesn't have enough of them to work with. Yeah,
and back to the injuries point. I mean, Bournemouth had more injuries than 5, and he was speaking ahead of the match, saying that his squad, I think he was talking about the attacking midfielders, the creative midfielders, and 2 were injured, Tavernier and Brooks, and then Semenyo was obviously out as well, and he was actually considering starting the lad, is it Toth, who just signed that week. I mean, that's how low in numbers they were. Now, okay, I think Slot would say, yeah, but they haven't played midweek and they've had a bit more recovery time. And, that is, there is some merit to that argument. But I just think that fundamentally, to end the game with a back 4 that includes 2 midfielders and a defender, you're on the verge of, well, certainly at the time anyway, considering selling in Andy Robertson, just sums up where Liverpool are at. They've left themselves too light in big areas of the field. And when they're pushing for the win, I mean, I know he did obviously throw on a couple of subs, but then at the end turns to Rio and Gamoa, a player who it just feels to me that he is so reluctant to actually give minutes to, and to have a small squad and have so many players like that is just not acceptable. And look, I agree with you that Slot, I do have some sympathy with Slot, but these decisions were made in conjunction with Arne Slot in the summer. Obviously, Richard Hughes was pivotal in that as well, and the Liverpool hierarchy in general. But Slot wants a small squad. He said that repeatedly, and wanting a small squad has led Liverpool to where they are now. And I think that actually Saturday summed up probably more than any game this season just how lacking in numbers Liverpool are. And I saw James Pearce writing in The Athletic talking about how Liverpool have suddenly got a big summer ahead of them. And I agree with him. But Liverpool have a big summer ahead of them, having just spent £450 million on transfers. That is mad. That's mad. And yeah, they've left themselves in a really, really sticky position where you actually go into the summer thinking they're going to need 4 or 5 additions on top of what they've got. And, they could obviously lose Ibrahim Konate as well in the summer as well. That's before we even get into all that. So just so many issues to come from that game. But I think the squad depth is now become a real problem. And Liverpool are we've got over the next couple of weeks and months. They're still competing in 3 competitions. Obviously, the Premier League, which is it's not going to be an easy task. The FA Cup and then the Champions League. So yeah, really big problems for Slot to contend with.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the summer, they're going to need at least 3 players more than what they've got now. Now, if they lose Konate or if they lose maybe 1 or 2 others, then suddenly that becomes 5 or 6. And we're talking about having a summer that was similar to last season, which I didn't think would be the case. I thought that was going to be a one-off. I mean, in terms of that, I don't necessarily think it was last summer that was the issue, because you look at all of the players that came in. I thought Kirkes was pretty terrible against Bournemouth, but has been generally very good in the last few weeks. Ekitike, Wirtz, Frimpong, all of these players I think are going to be very good for Liverpool, but there just isn't enough of them at the moment. It probably goes back a little bit further when you think of some of the rejuvenation, certainly at centre-back. They've just left it too long, really, and it wasn't possible to solve it all last summer. Even if Mark Gay had come in, that wouldn't necessarily have been the end of it. They needed probably 1 more on top of that as well, with potential exits. And obviously, Virgil van Dijk turns 35 later this year, so it probably goes back a little bit longer. Liverpool didn't obviously do anything in the first summer of Arne Slot. Maybe if they'd have done 1 or 2 then and spread the sort of rejuvenation across the squad over a period that was a little bit longer, then maybe we would have seen something a little bit different. But you mentioned Andy Robertson there. Should probably talk about him as well. As it stands, at least, the decision has been made by Liverpool that they can't let him go. Not absolutely set in stone, I don't think, but not a huge shock, is it really, that they can't afford to let another player go? It was a conversation, I think, that came out of respect for him and for all parties, but at the same time, it had to be a move that worked for everyone. And quite clearly, Andy Robertson came on and did all right at Bournemouth at half-time, played 45 minutes. I'd expect that he'll probably start at least one of the 2 games this week. For Liverpool to lose him, even if Spurs were very interested, even if it means they don't get a fee for him, I think it's probably the right call, isn't it, to keep him around. And I've seen a lot of people sort of talk about his leadership and his value in that sense, but still a very good player as well, who will play a part, I think, over the next few months.
Yeah, and I think it has been in general good this season. Not amazing, not fantastic, but has done a good job when he's come in. And there was that spell of games, wasn't it? Madrid, Villa, and then maybe Man City. I think he wasn't great against City, but the other 2 he was good. And I think he has done a good job, as I say, when he's played. I was baffled when the reports first emerged and you start asking questions about Robertson. I was just baffled that then he thought that he could have been allowed to leave. I suppose the logic was Liverpool have 6 defenders. They allow Robertson to leave, bring back Tsimikas, where you've still got 6. You're in no different position. And actually, you earn £5 million on a backup player who you're about to lose for free in the summer. So economically, maybe it makes sense. But I think even if you bring Tsimikas back, you should hold on to Robertson. And actually, for instance, I think he probably would be a better centre-back option than Wataru Endo, actually, as well, which is another thing to consider. This is what we've got to with Liverpool squad depth. This is what we're going to have to discuss, whether he can be deployed as an auxiliary centre-back. But yeah, listen, I think it was totally the right decision. I think that he, as you touched on as well, there's more than just in terms of the numbers. He's vice-captain. Liverpool have lost a lot of, let's say, established players from the Jurgen Klopp era, and we're this squad is starting to move to the post Klopp. I think it said Klopp. I can't remember if it said Slot or Klopp, but you know what I mean. But I think obviously this moving to the post Jurgen Klopp era, and I think having just Robertson just to help with that transition these next few months actually will be good in that sense. And yeah, I think it was certainly the right decision. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important to point out as well that Robertson obviously has remained professional and has carried on as normally. Played, as I say, pretty well, I thought, against Bournemouth when he came on, and did okay. Nothing spectacular by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I just think it is the right decision, really. I I don't think last season there was a huge gulf between Tsimikas and Robertson, but Robertson had the edge. And I just think at this point, even if it's only a minor downgrade at left back, they can't really afford for any more downgrades across the defence at the moment. Even if it was a marginal difference, that could come back to bite them. And, in terms of, you mentioned there, he's a better centre-back option than Wataru Endo. I don't think Tsimikas is a centre-back option at all. So that's another thing to come into it. If you needed a backup left-back who can slot in at centre-back, it's definitely Robertson and not Tsimikas. So maybe that has played into it as well. We spoke to Virgil van Dijk on Saturday, and he kind of said, well, I don't want him to go. He couldn't obviously say which way it was going to go, and it wasn't really for him to have a say on that. That was down to the player and to the club. But he didn't want him to go. I'm sure within the Liverpool dressing room, they didn't want that either. So it's definitely the right call. I think moving forwards, it was never a guarantee that it was going to happen. I think it was something that he wanted to explore. He said a couple of weeks ago that he wants to play football. That will happen. But I think even though he is desperate to play a little bit more football, he wouldn't have wanted to do anything that was detrimental to Liverpool as well. If he'd have gone out and that would have cost Liverpool, I don't think that would have sat right either from either party. So yeah, it was a reminder this weekend of just how short Liverpool are defensively, and keeping Robertson definitely makes sense. But
can I jump in before you move on from Robertson? Obviously, I was at the press conference Friday when the news kind of emerged, and there was a handful of reporters still there, and there was a discussion in the room whether Spurs would have been a good move for him. What's your thoughts? Do you think it would have been a good transfer for him?
I think so, yeah. I mean, Tottenham are a weird club, but there's definitely a potential there. I think they've got so many good players. They should be a lot better than what they are. And I do think they are crying out for somebody like an Andy Robertson who can come in and maybe help one or two of those younger players. I think they've probably just got too many players who are kind of very high potential. Lucas Bergvall, I think, is a really, really talented player, but maybe just needs somebody around him a little bit better at leading them. The fact that Christian Romero is the captain probably sums that up better than anything else. I don't think he necessarily leads by example or would be somebody to really look up to for young players quite a lot of the time. So I think it would have made sense definitely for Tottenham and for him as well. I think he would have got a lot more minutes. He would stay in the Premier League, which I think is a big appeal to him. People have said maybe he could leave in the summer, go to Celtic or something like that. But I mean, that would be a big step down, I think, in terms of the level that you're playing at. So yeah, for me, it made sense. It made sense as well in the summer. There was reported interest from Atletico Madrid. I could have seen something like that, maybe to go and try a different league or something like that. But I just think he's a good enough player. Okay, he's not Liverpool's first choice left back, but he's still a very, very good left back, and he should be playing at a good level. Whether that's competing for the league title or maybe with a Tottenham trying to get back into the Champions League and trying to keep pace with the top four. Any lower than that probably wouldn't quite sit right with me with him. But it's interesting there was a split. Which side of the split were you on in terms of that?
Yeah, I was on your side. I agree. And actually was in the minority in the room. The more people seem to think it was a strange move. I don't know whether maybe it was impacted by the thought just it was a strange time to leave, that leaving was the wrong choice rather than necessarily Spurs. But I mean, there was definitely talk about Spurs wasn't a good move. And my thoughts on it are that very similar to what you said. But I think if you go to Tottenham, first of all, you are going to a club in the Champions League right now they're going to be involved in certainly the knockout stages, shall we say, whether that's qualifying in the top 8 or moving on to that playoff round. So, he's moving to a big club, obviously huge stadium, amazing training facilities. He's going to go, I would have seen it in this scenario, he would have gone in as first choice left back. Again, there was a bit of conjecture about that, actually, amongst kind of people in the room. But I think it would have been a good move for him at this stage of his career. And ultimately, Celtic can wait. There's still time, 2-3 years down the line to go back to go to Celtic, which I suspect probably will happen at some stage for him. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where Celtic are going to say, no, you're all right. You're not good enough to. I don't mean that kind of disparagingly, but Scottish Premier League is just not Premiership. Sorry, it's just not as good a standard. So. Yeah, I think it's a good move. I think it would have been a good move for him, and I wonder whether it's one that he'll come back to explore in the summer.
Yeah, I think if anything comes of this, I think it's highly unlikely that he will sign a contract extension at Liverpool. I think we've seen that. I think in the summer, the power then is with him. The summer gives Liverpool an opportunity, whether it is Tsimikas coming back at the end of his loan or whether it's going into the market and buying somebody else. I think it'll just fit a lot better with the timeline for everybody at that point. That, you know, whether it's Tottenham or somewhere else, I'm sure there'll be interest in Andy Robertson again. And it sort of feels like if he does end up staying put as we expect this month, it then gives him a bit of time to think about what the next move might be, what's best for his family, give a proper goodbye to Liverpool as well. I think it'd be 9 years, won't it, that it will come up to by the end of this season, 9 full seasons. And yeah, it will feel like a better time for him to move on, I think. And that will sit better with all parties, I think, involved. So it's definitely the right decision in that sense as well. Just before we finish, I wanted to have a chat a little bit about the Premier League and the Champions League versions of Liverpool. Now, don't quite know where we're going to end up with this because it's quite a hard one to think about and explain. But have you any idea what the difference was between Wednesday night and then Saturday evening at Bournemouth? Because Liverpool was so good against Marseille, really poor at times against Bournemouth. And you know, we've touched on tiredness. Obviously, that is a factor. That is something to play into it. But I mean, this is not a new pattern. This was happening at the start of the season as well when they weren't tired. I think there's also a stylistic thing to bring into it. Yes, Marseille played into Liverpool's hands a little bit, but neither of those two things fully explain it to me that there should not be such a difference between one game and the next just because it's a different competition. It just doesn't seem to add up to me.
Well, I think one of the big factors is that obviously the opposition are more offensive or are looking to get on the ball and be a bit more expansive and therefore creating spaces for Liverpool to operate in. I mean, Marseille were a really extreme example of that, actually, and that the chasm in midfield at times was remarkable. But I agree with what you say, that there are a number of factors in it that have led to performances in Europe being much, much better than the Premier League. Don't know whether perhaps that there are some of the players that came in the summer. I'm thinking Frimpong, Ekitike, Wirtz, who are more experienced in the Champions League, therefore kind of are better adapting to playing in that than in the Premier League. It does seem like the Champions League is less physical as well, which I think will probably suit a Liverpool team that at times have looked a little bit weak and a little bit timid this season. I thought that was the case against Bournemouth. The Bournemouth part of the Bournemouth performance reminded me of that game away at Brentford in October when they were bullied by Brentford, and it just lacked a little bit of belief and that they were going to almost exert their will on the game. And yeah, I mean, that's one of I think there are a couple of the big factors, but it is incredible that they have repeatedly actually played very well in the Champions League and underwhelmed so many times in the Premier League. And this is now 5 matches or 5 weeks in a row without a Premier League win. And the opposition that played, excluding Arsenal, 4 of those 5 you would expect really that Liverpool should be winning. So they are stylistically really struggling at the moment in terms of just what the Premier League is and like conceding another late goal, but also from a long throw, I think is very telling as well. Again, shades of the Brentford game in that as well, actually. And yeah, I just keep coming back to the same point. There's actually just so many issues now that Slot has to resolve. And the 13-game run, wow, listen, Liverpool are in a much better position than they were when they lost to PSV at the end of November. And they are. And if anyone says they're not, that's just simply incorrect. But there are still big problems. And that 13-game run did, paper over the cracks a little bit, I think, at times. And I think now that they have lost the game, suddenly all the detractors and everyone who wants to criticize have come to the surface and actually been given plenty to feed on, I think.
Yeah, it is such a weird thing to try and think about what the differences can be. I think you're right in terms of the physicality. I can't remember who it was, possibly Jamie Carragher this week was talking about Liverpool's midfield looking like they're playing 5-a-side at times, and just the little touches and the little nice technique, but maybe not quite being able to physically go up against teams. I think that is definitely something that more so in the Premier League, even against a team like Bournemouth, who I don't think are the most physical or direct team. I think they play quite good football. They've got people like Christie and a couple of players in that midfield. They're not massive. They're not completely players that shouldn't be able to certainly from a Liverpool perspective, that you shouldn't be able to compete with. But I think that's maybe a difference. But it still shouldn't be one version of Liverpool on one day, and then 2 or 3 days later it looks completely different. It just shouldn't be that much of a difference, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point about the keeping possession. And at times it is like they're knocking about from side to side, and they're almost, we'll just keep passing it and we'll wait for the opportunity to come. And the opportunity is not coming. You've got to force it, make it happen. And it doesn't seem like they're capable of doing that at the moment. And in the Champions League, for whatever reason, those opportunities are there. And actually, they've been much better from set pieces in the Champions League as well, which is just, I cannot put my finger on why that is. I mean, maybe our Premier League team's better in that regard. I don't know, but it's just it's just an unfathomable season at times, and yeah, Slot's got his work cut out to keep coming back to it. And he's just got and he's also kind of find a way of getting better performances out of players. And I mentioned at the start, I was really disappointed by Mohamed Salah. I thought we were going to see a really fired up Salah come back, and I know we touched on him in the last podcast. I was a bit disappointed with him against Marseille. Give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt. I thought against Bournemouth, he just offered it so little. And actually, Slot is back to the same problem as November, that you'd look at him and think, well, should he be dropped for the midweek match? And suddenly the headlines that will come if he is dropped for that game against Karabakh will be, you can just see them now.
And they don't really have that many options, do they? In case it might be back. Well, I mean, he wouldn't necessarily do anything better. They don't have anybody now at right back. I quite like the idea of Frimpong being a little bit further forward, but you can't move him because there's nobody else to play there. So yeah, plenty of questions. I feel like we've posed more questions than answers in some ways in this podcast, but I mean, that is just how the season is going for Liverpool, really. Just a final bit. We've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast recently. I've been a lot more confident than you, certainly, that Liverpool make the top 4 or top 5 this season. Obviously, now they are behind Manchester United and Chelsea. Do you see United under Carrick and Chelsea under Liam Rosenior going and being consistent enough, do you think, to overtake Liverpool? Is that kind of cemented from what we've seen so far? I know it's still early days from both of those. United have won a couple of big games, and that is obviously making their situation look a lot better. Chelsea have done all right without being spectacular. Are you any more convinced, any less convinced by what you've seen so far? What's your sort of take it at this moment in time?
It's difficult to judge, isn't it? Because both haven't really been in for too long. I've seen both of Carrick's games, and obviously they were very impressive. Man United, I think you made the point off there. Let's wait and see when they've got a game where they're not absolutely maybe quite have to see a motivation levels as going to the leaders and the Manchester derby. So Chelsea, I don't know. I haven't actually seen much of Chelsea since Rosenior came in, so I'm not sure. But what I stand by, and the point I've kind of made a couple of times over the last few weeks, is that it just takes 2 of that pack of, I mean, they've got to almost 10 clubs. It only takes 2 to put together a strong run between now and the end of the season, and suddenly Liverpool are going to have real issues. And the debate you and I is kind of the 3rd week in a row. You and I have discussed this, and it led me to ask Arne Slot basically on Friday in his press conference, just how confident are you of getting the top 4 finish or top 5? And his response was very confident. I wonder secretly if sitting right now as we record this podcast, he is feeling quite as confident as he was on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say that's where my confidence levels are at. Not completely shot, but certainly maybe less so than what I thought before. But yeah, I suppose fundamentally I'd stick to what I said last week in terms of, I think for Manchester United and for Chelsea, and I do think it'll be those two, because I mean we saw Aston Villa with a good win at Newcastle. I think Newcastle were the other one that I thought maybe could come into it, but just not convinced by them. I think it would have to be Manchester United and Chelsea who are both consistent enough. Now, United only playing 1 game a week, that's a big advantage for them. Chelsea obviously have enough players and enough quality in that team to be able to be consistent, but you'd like to think that Liverpool can do a little bit of that as well. If they can just sort of be average for the rest of this season, I do think they'll be just about okay. But yeah, it's certainly a lot tighter than I and Arne Slot would have liked it to be, and it looks a lot different, doesn't it? Even if Liverpool have got points, I think it would look better, having come back and fought back from 2-0 down against Bournemouth, but obviously them go and throw it away right at the end anyway. But we will leave it there. Fortunately, the Champions League is back this week, so hopefully we'll see the good version of Liverpool midweek, and then an important game as well at the weekend against Newcastle, which I think will be an interesting one as well, a chance to make a little bit of a buffer to them and maybe strengthen the top four hopes as well in that game. But we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast right here on the Blood Red channel.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.